Good evening, everybody. I'm David Eglin, President of the Society for Contemporary Art. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to our lecture series on the Art Institute exhibition, Andy Warhol from A to B and Back Again. Hopefully you've all seen the exhibition by now. Here in Chicago, it's the final stop after 2 successful runs at the Whitney in New York and SF MoMA. Tonight is our third of 4 SCA-sponsored lectures on Warhol, and we are really excited to have Adam Pendleton here, who's going to talk about his own practice in relationship to Warhol's. Tonight's lecture is generously sponsored by our friends at Sotheby's, so please thank them. Should you see them around, thank you. Before I turn the podium over to Programming Chair Patty Sternberg, I just wanted to mention a few of our other upcoming events in the coming months. On November 20th, we wrap up the Warhol Lecture Series with a presentation by Donna DeSalvo, who is the organizing curator of the Warhol exhibition and was formerly Deputy Director and Senior Curator of International Initiatives at the Whitney Museum of American Art. In addition to our Warhol lectures, we have some other exciting programming events in the coming months. We close out this calendar year with a gallery tour and talk of Julia Fisch's solo exhibition, Bound by Spectrum, at the DePaul Art Museum. This gallery tour and reception will be held on December 10th and is exclusive to SCA members. Unfortunately, if you haven't signed up yet, it has sold out, so you won't be able to join us for that, but we have lots of other great things coming in 2020. We kick off the new year with a talk by Chicago-based and highly acclaimed artist Catherine Sullivan, who will be speaking about her practice, which combines video and performance. Catherine studied at Cal Arts and did her graduate work under Mike Kelly at the Art Center in Los Angeles. She now teaches at the University of Chicago in addition to her studio practice, and that lecture is going to be on January 15th. Then on February 8th, we welcome pioneering artist Vaginal Davis, whose multifaceted career has included painting, performance, filmmaking, sculpture, and writing. This Berlin-based artist has a fascinating practice rooted in the intersections of race, sex, gender, art, punk, and politics. So I think this is going to be a really, really interesting evening, and you should mark that in your calendars. So to learn more about any of these upcoming events, please visit the SCA website for details. And now welcome Patty Sternberg, Programming Chair for the SCA, to introduce Adam. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Tonight we will be hearing from Adam Pendleton, who will be examining and exploring his own practice in relation to Andy Warhol's. Adam is a New York-based artist known for work animated by what he calls Black Dada, a critical articulation of blackness, abstraction, and the avant-garde. Drawing from an archive of language and images, Adam makes conceptually rigorous and formally inventive paintings, collages, videos, and installations that insert his work into broader conversations about history and contemporary culture. Pendleton has been the subject of solo exhibitions across the United States and abroad at institutions including Kunstverein Amsterdam, the Kitchen New York, Kunstwerke Institute for Contemporary Art Berlin, Baltimore Museum of Art, and MIT List Visual Arts Center, Cambridge. His 2016 solo exhibition, Becoming Imperceptible, was organized by the Contemporary Arts Center, New Orleans, and traveled to the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver, before closing at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Cleveland. Please join me in welcoming Adam Pendleton.
Thank you for being here tonight. And there's a timer next to me. I can obey or not, right? Let's see what happens. What do we do with our bodies? Inarticulate, exhausted, what can our bodies do? What does my body do? What can my body do? in relationship to painting? These are some of the questions that came to mind when I thought of my work in relationship to Andy Warhol's. Perhaps an odd place to start, but I thought the way I could look at Warhol's work in relationship to mine was thinking of myself as a painter and Warhol as a painter, even though neither one of us is strictly a painter. A painter in their body. I, like the machine of painting, the machine of the image, the machine of the surface and the elusiveness of the image, the potential of the reproducible and the limits of that which is not immediately or legible as abstract. I've come to think of painting as a performance, an obstacle my body must wade through. I can push painting in the same way I can push my body. I have to listen to what my body in painting can do. I have to learn, pay attention, to adapt. What is this machine of painting? Is it rusted and wilted or vibrant and easily misunderstood? Is it the language before or after? Is it the language of the before or of the after? Bounded, plain, the object before the viewer's own vertical body facing off against it. The exhaustive in the exhausted. There can be visual similarities, but what does that say about intent? Warhol's shadow paintings, 1978, 1979. The Black Dada paintings. This combinatorial image, this combinatorial intent. Must one be exhausted to give oneself over to the combinatorial? Or is the combinatorial that exhausts us, that leads us to exhaustion? Or even the two together, the combinatorial and the exhaustion? This exhaustion of the two, to make an image from time to time, this beautiful exhaustion. He was beautiful because he was exhausted. He was beautiful and exhausted. The art is beautiful and exhaustive. The art is beautiful because it is exhaustive. I think of the Black Dada paintings as a stage. The character, the idea takes its place. But what is this thing, this Black Dada? Black Dada is frequently given the following provisional definition: to talk about the future while talking about the past. This is not necessarily to make a future projection or to propose a future, but it is rather to collapse pastness and future, to articulate each within the other. It is about slipping between past, focused to various degrees of contraction or dilation. 1916, Dada. 1964, Amiri Baraka. 1974, Lewitt. Making mixtures and recombinations, the combinatorial and the exhaustive. Historical Dada is more or less formulated as a punk, no future ethos, a playful, anarchic negativity. I do not care, that refuses the reproduction of the past, associated most immediately with bourgeois culture and the horrors of World War I, and espouses the great negative work of destruction, Dada, abolition of memory, Dada, abolition of archaeology, Dada, abolition of prophets, Dada, abolition of the future. Although it insists on the necessity of the destruction of this world, a world of journalism, worms, everything nice and right, blinkered, moralistic, European, enervated. Dada is highly productive. But it does not produce what could be submitted and recognized as a construction, a design, an organization, a plot, a unity. Its mode of production is that innovations in typography, montage, and performance hinge on emulating in interrupting technologically conditioned processes of serial spacing and serial linkage, iterating on that word, Dada. Even as the manifestos of 1916 and 1918 perform a game of repetition, Dada is chronically insufficient postulate that one can only keep saying and saying and saying again. Dada is an archive. Dada is eternal bliss. By saying Dada, how does one become famous? By saying Dada, with a noble gesture and delicate propriety, till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness. And years later, the Black Dada paintings, the stage, are followed by the performance, untitled, A Victim of American Democracy. America, Campbell's Soup, and Marilyn Monroe. America, a queer man in a wig. America, I stand in my studio in front of the canvas, spray paint can in hand. I make my body parallel to the gessoed surface. This spray paint, this dumb, simple machine in my hand, I wield it. Not too much pressure, not too little, just enough. This is what my body does, calibrates my hand just so. Just make the mark and don't press too hard. Don't make a mistake. Don't make it so I have to begin again. America, begin again. Does the performance take place in front of or on top of the stage? How to articulate a poetics of construction, turn the rules, guidelines, and conditions of representation into protagonists, insist on language unavoidably present, transcendental ambiguity. The painting stutters, he stutters, refusing both the limits of representation and the critical void of painterly abstraction. I insist on being read. They insist on being read. They do not speak. They do not speak clearly. I want to collapse past and future in order to describe each within the other, to speak of incomplete postulates and beginnings, to play dirty and joyfully with expressionistic dots, in long, linear, spray-painted strokes. I assure you, there is no beginning, and we are not afraid. We aren't sentimental. We are like a raging wind that rips up the clothes of clouds and prayers. We are preparing the great spectacle of disaster and decomposition, preparing to put an end to mourning and to replace tears by sirens spreading from one continent to another, clarions of intense joy bereft of that poisonous sadness. How is the body best represented? There are so many types of bodies: her body, his body, their body, a sick body, a young body, an old body, a failed body, their body. It's 1962. Warhol has an idea: make a piss painting. 15 years later, in 1977, he would return to the idea. The Oxidation series, produced between 1977 and 1978, was one of Warhol's few forays into non-representational painting. To create the works, Warhol and his assistants urinated onto copper-coated canvases where the uric acid would slowly oxidize the metal and create a green patina. The mottled, splashy surfaces are often regarded as a parody of abstract expressionist action paintings. The high seriousness of that movement, undercut by the nonchalance of Warhol's use of liquid waste as a material. Or put another way, the paintings extend a certain abstract expressionist logic to an absurd conclusion. Jackson Pollock's desire for immediacy, for being in the painting, and a kind of ritualistic communion of painter, paint, and canvas is realized even more immediately. The paintbrush, an extension of the body, is substituted by the penis, the body itself, while paint is replaced by the body's leftovers, not without a homoerotic charge. Warhol, though, was probably not interested in such erotic immediacy in and of itself. And indeed, any notion of immediacy is difficult to entertain within the context of Warhol's body of work. Series like Oxidation, which derive from the similar piss and cum paintings, and Rorschach paintings, which all involve a formless materiality, are certainly swerves from the series of silk-screened icons, found photographs, and portraits for which Warhol is better known. But maybe the two domains are not so different. As with everything Warholian, there is little that remains uncomplicated by the artist's methods of evasion and concealment. His interest in serial reproduction end in the exhaustion of the image. His insistence on acriticality, a program of liking things, ironically or not. The paintings may have been parodic, but they do not then thumb their noses at mid-century abstract painting. For one thing, we can imagine a particular mise en scène of production, Warhol's assistants having prepared the canvas with copper paint, laying it on the floor. Someone, an assistant, or sometimes a friend or stranger hired for the task, urinates on the canvas. It is said that Warhol often recruited young men from bathhouses. Warhol is probably observing, not directing in the usual sense, but watching was his typical approach. A voyeuristic triangle emerges between Warhol, the pissers, and the paintings. Instead of the image of the solitary Pollock, the image of production here is that of a series of people, an assembly line of painters, spilling their bodily fluids on canvases, a pissing contest, or an orgy, with Warhol, the artist, more or less passively regarding this scenario. And it was necessary to instrumentalize and discipline the bodies to a certain extent, to ensure that the pissing techniques were optimized, that the pissers would perform well, and basically that they would make a good picture. Warhol mentions one assistant who took a lot of vitamin B, which apparently caused his urine to react more dramatically with the copper paint. This assistant began doing most of the paintings in the series. Warhol's major works, the silkscreens and arguably the films too, provide a kind of set for the minor oxidation works, forcing us to read the latter's compulsive, repetitive deployment of bodies with an eye towards the compulsive, repetitive deployment of images. Likewise, I would argue, the Black Dada paintings, with their obvious permittability and modularity, stages the apparently more gestural work in the untitled A Victim of American Democracy paintings, in video portraits. If the former are a stage, the latter are the performance. If the former are a stage, the latter are a performance. The performance is circumscribed by its stage, invested, unconsciously or not, with the logic of that stage. The untitled paintings, though, are not simple action paintings, although they may make that impression at first. The paintings are composed using a combination of predefined lines, particularly the later ones, which are marked out in pencil and then spray painted and layered, silk-screened photographs of text. Nonetheless, the illusion of spontaneity is integral to these works, and it might not be inaccurate to call this a Warholian illusion, not a negation of gesture, but a kind of concealment strategy that makes the authenticity or reality of any gesture undecidable. The concreteness of pissing or painting directly onto canvas becomes abstract. Certain modes of abstracting, unsettling, and exhausting the body at a voyeuristic remove are echoed in the video portrait that I shot of the New York-based choreographer and dancer Ishmael Houston Jones. In Ishmael in the Garden, a portrait of Ishmael Houston Jones, the titular Jones performs a solo from Them, a piece that remembers the victims of the AIDS epidemic. Can we turn the sound up for the next clip, please? Ishmael's dance is complete. He performs with a kind of anguished intensity. It is an encounter in an almost classically expressionistic sense with ghost. We watch Ishmael dance for the camera. For me, a voyeur. Later, we watch him read from his erotic fiction directly into the camera.
Shirt off, redder from the neck up than the chest, nipples oval like oval quarters. No, that's not quite it. Dusty rose, darker than chest hair, not pink. He's naked. Drops of piss on his thigh. Penis is small and unthreatening. There's a drop of pee hanging off the head. Pubic hair is dark brown and straight. Ball sack is loose and red underneath. He has a rash that he thought he had to explain. He's circumcised. A brown circle rings him mid-dick. White spots on the scrotum. Even his pubes smell clean. There's almost something medicinal about the odor. He's smelling his hair.
Here, Ishmael presents another virtual or fictional body, attempting to describe the textures and contours of the somewhat disappointing sexual encounter. The language starts and stops. Ishmael struggles to get the terms right. He is speaking at a distance, reading from a text that attempts to reconstruct the already instrumentalized body of a prostitute. Further, he has been instructed to do so by me, the artist, the director. Afterwards, he touches his own face. The raw immediacy of the body, confounded and derealized. It is a strange juxtaposition, the dance with its passion, and the reading with its uncomfortable coldness, its sense of failure or exhausted possibility. Bodies with nothing interesting to do. Ishmael is, if not entirely, a piece about exhaustion, physical exhaustion in the dance, linguistic exhaustion in the writing, libidinal exhaustion in the narrative. To think of the body is to think of death. Is to think of the body to think of death. Ishmael's ghost, my fear of losing you. Oh, my very dear child, what shall I say? Warhol's art, too, was one of exhaustion. He frequently claimed that every image had been already made and seemed to imply that the only possibility left was the machinic repetition and consumption of the already made, of the exhausted image, the face, the brand, the product, the event, the personality. In an essay on Beckett, Deleuze delineates 4 ways of exhausting the possible, forming exhaustive series of things, drying up the flow of voices, extenuating the potentialities of space, dissipating the power of the image. The exhausted is the exhaustive, the dried up, the extenuated in the dissipated, he writes. Deleuze's terms generated through a short but deep engagement with Beckett, as well as Godard's cliches of Melville's Bartleby, also basically describes Warhol's working techniques, his grids of reproductions, his long-take films, his exploitation of the mechanics of branded commodities, and drying up the flows of liquid consumption, the flows of drinking and pissing. The oxidation paintings are an exercise in exhausting bodies. To exhaust the body, but not completely, or rather, like Bartleby, the exhausted body makes possible a different mode of existence, one that was precluded by the desire or the injunction to realize. In Just Back from Los Angeles, a portrait of Yvonne Rainer, Rayner reads from a certainly not exhaustive list of Black people killed by cops in America in 2014. These accounts are interspersed with text from Rayner's own memoir, from which Rayner also reads. Its parallel track is a minimal physical gesture, a move that is also a memory drawn from Rayner's work with Steve Paxton. This is the arm drop, which Rayner demonstrates with me, perhaps a sharing of feeling, support, or care, but in any case, a kind of abstraction.
I remember the breathlessness of the lifting section. I remember the opening bars of the Chambers Brothers and doing Trio A. I remember you grinning at the pleasure we had. I remember talking to you in the hotel. I remember standing around waiting to start the run-through. I remember the pleasure of huddling in the rolls. Yeah.
Two bodies. What can we do? Thank you. I think I get that question everywhere I go. I don't exclude anything in terms of color or material. Rather than thinking of it as excluding, I think of it as simply using what is necessary. So if color is necessary, it's necessary. If it's not necessary, it's not necessary. Even in the work here, the brief clip of Ishmael reading, as you saw, that was shot in color film, and that's because it was necessary. And a palette, the palette is not, so it's not simply black nor white. And of course, within black or within white, there are an infinite range of possibilities and tones and finishes. So I utilize and I do what the work demands.
So your use of wall drawings or wall installations previously, would you now, in relation to what you talked about as the stage, the painting as the stage, refer to this as your stage for new works or for other work?
I couldn't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I was asking about the wall drawings which you've made at Kunst, like in Berlin and other places, and how initially those were the works themselves, and then later had works hung upon them.
Sure.
So, sorry, in my throat. Would you now call that, in relation to your talk tonight, the stage? Is that how you see it now, these pieces? Like the stage upon which other things can operate?
That's a good question. The wall works, that's a very good question, and I actually didn't think about that. Because I've been sort of in this sort of more limited space where this is a newer work, where I've been thinking about the paintings. This is just a detail. The more recent works as the kind of, I'm thinking of a kind of progression, and the newer work for me, visually and also just the way in which it is made, is very different than the Black Dada paintings. And I needed a kind of theoretical but also concrete way to understand the difference. And one of the primary differences was, as I spoke to tonight, what it demands of my body. And so I think in that way, I feel there's a similar distance between the wall works and the Black Dada paintings that there is between the Black Dada paintings and these newer paintings, which put different kinds of demands on my body. So it's really about me in relationship to the work. And of course I can theorize, and perhaps if I did, yes, the wall works would form some kind of stage, some kind of foundation. But for me, it's about how these things combine, how the relationships between that which is on the wall, that which is on top of what is on the wall, etc., come together to form one thing, a complete experience, a kind of site of engagement between the artwork and the viewer. I can take a couple more questions if anyone has any. Thank you.